Welcome to this webinar, everyone, and thank you for joining the session on energy transition. This is our last but not least session of the Africa Conference 2021. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for people to join the session. As I can see, people are starting to join. Let me go through some of the ground rules to make sure this goes as well as possible for everyone. This webinar is provided with simultaneous interpretation. So everyone should select a language room. It can be English, French, or Portuguese. Please chat directly to the host. That would be published what you pay secretariat in the drop-down list if you have any technical difficulties. And feel free to use the chat page, select all panelists and attendees to introduce yourself. You can also use the Q&A sections to ask your questions to the panelists. If someone has asked a question that you're interested to hear answered, then please vote for it using the thumbs up icon. By participating in this webinar, you are agreeing to uphold the code of conduct, which is being shared now in the chat in English and French. Kindly note that this webinar will be recorded and a link will be made available shortly. I'll pass it on to Salim Fakir now, who will be moderating the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadrine, and I wanted to welcome all the participants. I don't see you other than the panelists, but I'm sure you're there. Thank you very much. I think this is probably a very exciting and timely session. And I don't want to speak a lot, but I do want to share some thoughts, just introductory remarks before I ask the speakers to come on board. Firstly, I think energy transitions are painted as potentially as a new panacea for not only climate change, but certainly for economic transformation and reform around the world. But we have to bear in mind that these transitions are happening within an existing economic system, which is highly unequal. It is largely a fairly divided world in terms of the wealth distribution that we can understand. And I think that there is an emergence of a certain type of geopolitics in which Africa is going to be in the throes of that. So I think we really do want to understand both the negatives and the positives of energy transitions in the context of a post-COVID world, the context in which decarbonization in a massive structural way have quietly been introduced during the COVID crisis, specifically by Europe and China, and now the US is coming on board. So they hold significant ramifications for Africa. And I think part of those ramifications is that before we all get excited about very nice labels like the Green Deal, low carbon transitions, all these very wonderful words that sound like we are solving the world's problems, but it may end up being solving some parts of the world's problems and leave everybody else behind. So I think it's important that we be astute, we understand this. We do know that Africa is also highly dependent on extractives. It's likely to continue to do so in the post-COVID period. If one has examined and studied the high levels of debt, and in particular, we should be even more granular. This is not just a broad concept of debt. It's understanding of who holds the debt, what kind of debt is being held, and who are the key players effectively in the creditor market today that never were there before, and how they are shaping African politics and sovereignty. We are also in the throes of a significant new wave of technologies that are highly dependent on key strategic minerals. We know of them in Africa, like cobalt, lithium, graphite, rare earths, the PGMs, etc. And we are in the throes of geopolitical competition for those resources. Behind the governments, behind the government rules, behind the government policies, there are interesting new firms that are using the green label to produce this new wave of technology. And many of them are actually acquiring mining rights that traditionally they did not actually have investments in. So we do know of some of these companies, like automotive companies, that are investing heavily in extractives across the world. Particularly, we see that in Latin America with lithium, and we do know of that in Africa. Now, just because they are fighting in our cause on green issues doesn't mean they are good companies, or they give necessarily a fair deal to their workers, or the conduct of extractive is of sound nature. So we need to examine this. We have 3 great speakers from all over. I would like to first say that each speaker has 15 minutes each. I have on my page a reminder to the speakers that they must speak slow because of translation. If you have not joined the right translation box, it's your time to do so now. You have to go on the right side of the Zoom screen. You will see it says global, and you click on there, whether you speak Portuguese, English, or French, and you can just join the translation. So I'd like to invite Johnny West, and then later John-Claude Katenda, Maple Aqua. I hope you pronounce your name right. I don't have their bios in front of me, but Johnny, if you want to maybe introduce yourself, he's from Open Oil, and he's going to talk about the potential impacts of energy transition in economies of oil-rich and extractive resource countries. Can I invite you, Johnny? Thank you very much. And we don't have the floor to applause you, but you can take it for granted there is an applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I hand over the platform to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Salim. Yes, I'm Johnny West. I'm the director of Open Oil, and over the last few years, we've concentrated essentially on financial analysis of natural resource assets, running models of big projects, and doing that for the public policy side of things. So that's quite traditional work, but in the last year or so, we've moved from modeling energy projects to a heavy concentration on the energy transition aspects of those projects. And actually, I've just started effectively what's a year-long sabbatical to work for Carbon Tracker to set up a global fossil fuels reserves database. So that's where I'm coming from. And I want to completely echo what Salim also just said about the uneven nature of the energy transition in different parts of the world. I'm here in beautiful Berlin. If I get my app out, I will be able to find an electric car sharing car somewhere within 300 meters of right here, and get into it and drive it anywhere relatively cheaply, park it anywhere, because all of these companies, you know, do block parking deals with the Berlin City Council. And Berlin is just about to, which I have to say I am quite excited about, while being fully skeptical about electric cars and Elon Musk and so on. Nevertheless, I can't withhold my excitement at the fact that Berlin is just about to get the largest electric vehicle factory in the world, which will be Tesla's kind of entry into the European market. So that is all lovely and unrepresentative. I'm glad to be the beneficiary of it personally, but it's really important, I think, the point that Salim made, and I'm just illustrating it there from a personal perspective. As Salim also said, COVID sped up energy transition considerably. We can't see exactly how much because a lot of this is happening under the bonnet. This morning, I spoke to a senior technocrat for a global economic bloc who said that they are now, by the end of this year, they will have written and distributed internally a plan for the total end of fossil fuels. No detail, don't know what time frame, etc. But that's the world we now live in, is no longer about moderating. And what we see with COVID in the last 12 months is, including even the companies, talking about going to zero, and then there's the usual range of arguments about what you mean by zero and net zero and so on. But the whole conversation has fundamentally shifted in the last 18 months or 24 months. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about what that means for PWYP and transparency activists. But I do also want to put the broader picture, which is that partly that's a response to the perception that climate change itself, the underlying problem, is moving much faster and is more serious than was previously considered. I mean, that's simple fact. The Paris process was set in play now 6 years ago on a scientific consensus that was built 2 or 3 years before that. So the global policy consensus is about a decade old. And in those last 10 years, all observable data show the problem speeding up beyond the science that was used to form, mainstream policy framework. I'm sure everyone can think of their own examples of that, which is how we come now to officials talking about how to plan the end, not tapering down, but the end. I mean, obviously not from one year to the next, but. So I'd like to talk about 3 issues: managed decline, transition minerals, and just transition. And I'd like to just breeze through the first 2 because I believe those are the issues which are most commonly already out there, and concentrate a bit more on just transition issues because I think it's absolutely critical, especially in the African context. So I think we can see so far there are obvious managed decline issues when you say fossil fuels are going to wind down for any producing countries. And we know what they are. There's economic diversification. How will Nigeria or Angola diversify their economies? We already see massive pressure on the contractual relations between companies and governments because everyone's hurting, so to speak. So companies are asking for concessions in the tax regime, the civil society concern of a fair deal. It's really hard to say what a fair deal is in this environment, especially when we think there won't be a new normal there won't be a new normal to be able to create easy comparison mechanisms. 2 years ago, I could have done an analysis of a project and say the government take is X, and I could put it in a chart and say that's towards the low side, towards the high side, in the middle, or whatever. But all of that is up in the air now. And of course, there are the workers in fossil fuel industries. These are all acknowledged, recognized issues, which I'm sure many people will have things to say about. So I just, note them. Transition minerals also. I think what I'd like to say about transition minerals is, yes, they are they could have very dramatic impact. But when I looked recently at the PWYP country list around the world, there were only 6 or 7 which had, strong connection to transition minerals. Congo, obviously, South Africa, Chile, Botswana. That list is likely to grow here and there, but I think it's important to point out it's a very sizable issue but also a target. Perhaps more than half of the countries in the coalition will not have significant issues around energy transition because they won't have reserves of lithium or cobalt or whatever. So I think it's worth trying to think how each of these issues maps to different countries. So I note also that issue. But where I really want to go, because I feel it's as yet undercovered, is what are the implications of a just transition. And I think, to be honest, I've noticed, talking to many African colleagues over the years, a reluctance around this agenda, which I fully understand. And I believe, I'm just going to, call it like I see it. I believe it's based on the fact that most African countries are energy poor. I mean, when you've got 25% access to electricity, as you do in Uganda, the idea of people coming to tell you these ways you'd thought of generating more energy and electricity are going to destroy the planet. And, let's face it, the people that are telling you that come from countries who, developed all of these technologies in the first place and are responsible for the vast majority of emissions in the atmosphere right now. I totally understand that reluctance. I totally understand it. And I believe that it's a major failure of, slightly controversial perhaps, but I believe it's a major failure of the environmentalist movement globally to have not developed grounded proposals to help deal with. It's fine to have words which say, yes, we care about, that. We care about economic development, of course. But I've studied this quite a lot, and I have to say that I haven't seen a detailed, grounded policy agenda, except emerging very, very recently, and then not from mainstream environmentalist groups, from environmentalist dissident groups, in fact. But, I think it's quite simple. Africa and many other parts of the global south have fast-growing energy demand, and are at a stage in the development curve where that greater access to energy can be very easily translated into genuine development, genuine improvement of people's lives. I mean, in energy as a whole, we face the classic issue that here, if I had twice as much energy, it would increase my quality of life relatively little, because I've already reached a basic level. We already have lights and so on. But, if I was living in a remote village in Mali, if I doubled my electricity access, it would fundamentally transform everything about my life. So you've got massive legitimate need for greater access to energy. And I think it's really simple. I think the rich world has to put in $1 to $3 trillion. So in the rich world, we say we've got to produce less fossil fuels because it's frying the planet. And that is bad news for everyone. And it is bad news for everyone. It is totally global. But unless we say, here's $3 trillion over the next 15 years, and really on that scale, so that we totally acknowledge your need for energy access. And by the way, why don't we redefine energy and add it to the list of basic human rights? So therefore, the only answer is we're going to have to pay for it. I mean, then there's a host of details, like how much of that is public money. In my view, quite a lot, because the private sector is a bit risk averse. Nevertheless, it's needed to solve the urgency of the problem. As much private money as possible, because that's always good. And the market is good for some things and bad at others. And you want competition, you want diversity in sub-solutions. But we kind of need that. That's the place to start a conversation about the just transition from, acknowledging energy use. And then you get to the question of, well, the people who are affected by climate change and energy transition. As I say, so far there's been a recognition of people who have jobs in fossil fuel industries, which of course is entirely legitimate. Of course it is. But those number in the tens of thousands of people. The people who are going to be affected by, extreme weather patterns and who don't have enough access to energy as it is, are in the hundreds of millions. And is it our job in this community to only be concerned with someone who's got the word extractives on their job label? Or are we actually talking about the overall impact? Because in terms of the overall impact of climate change itself and the consequences of an energy transition which isn't fully just, then the numbers of people in the global south that are affected by that, are 100 times greater in these other categories than just, Chevron's workers in Nigeria or so on. So I do think in campaigning terms, actually, that's a tremendous opportunity, because if you share that point of view, then the natural kind of campaigning focus you want to have is to say, these are all joint North-South campaigns. Publish What You Pay has had some successful North-South campaigns in the past around, supply chains. I remember one minute, okay. I remember one between France and Niger, tracing the uranium going through to the French nuclear industry. There's obviously a culture adapted to that, an appetite to do that. And if you take this view of the transition, then North-South combined campaigns are the norm, and then single country campaigns would be perhaps in second place rather than the other way around. You've got a very strong presence in the global North and in the global South, and all of those aspects of a just transition, I think, offer themselves, with this coalition being very powerfully, perhaps almost uniquely placed to play a role in them. So last thing I would say is part of that is we want renewables to be so normal. Yeah, they're part of normal life. That means they will bring problems themselves. When there is enough solar energy in Africa, there will be transparency and governance issues around the solar industry, just as there are around mining or whatever. Whose land did the company rent on what terms, and how did that contract happen? Who gets priority access to off-grid networks, etc.? And that's something to plan for. These are not Cinderella technologies. We massively need them because we need to stop frying a planet. But why not think ahead and prepare for the governance issues which will come with those technologies as well when they're deployed in scale? So that's what I got to say.
Thank you very much, Johnny, and for sticking to time. I also realized, with the audience, I didn't introduce myself properly. I'm actually the executive director for a very new foundation based in South Africa. It's called the African Climate Foundation. And I do want to concur with 2 points that Johnny made. And this is something that we as a foundation are also very looking closely at. We don't believe that this debate on just transition is representing a broader societal view that is much more about economic diversification on the continent. This is not just a climate issue. Cannot solve the climate issue without completely trying to shift economies to more diversified models of development. And that, by the way, requires very strong accountability, democracy, and actual investment in people on the continent, which is really what is lacking. So I concur with you, Johnny, that there needs to be more groundedness, and more importantly, I think the just transition debate is relevant for the African continent, because we cannot think of this simply a matter of energy transition. This is about a broader just transition from a shift from elite capture to broader inclusive economy, and that's the just transition we should be speaking about on the continent. And there's another dimension to it, is that countries cannot do that because their sovereignty often is hijacked by geopolitical interest, and therefore campaigning needs to uncover some of these issues from a geopolitical and broader trade aspect. So the just transition, we have the responsibility to widen the concept of the just transition beyond a narrow climate capture, I would say, to a more broader economic development for it to be more relevant on the continent. This is the big shift that I think should be happening. In my conversations with the Publish What You Pay colleagues, I have stressed that the entire notion of extractives has to move towards more transparency and accountability around the relationship between resource extraction and distribution in the broader society. So let me leave it at that. I'm going to invite Jean-Claude Katenda to speak for 15 minutes. Jean-Claude, if I can give the floor to you. I know you're going to speak in French, so people must switch to the English translation. Can I invite you, John? And if you can just say a little bit about yourself as well. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je pense qu'on est en train de me suivre. En fait, il m'avait été demandé de pouvoir parler sur le cadre de la République démocratique du Congo en ce qui concerne les défis, n'est-ce pas, les défis et les enjeux de la transition énergétique. Les cas de la République démocratique du Congo. Je voudrais remercier les organisateurs que nous sommes de m'avoir placé sur ce panel pour que je puisse partager l'expérience de la République démocratique du Congo. La première chose que je voudrais faire noter, c'est que pour nous, la transition énergétique doit être une transition juste, équitable, progressive et maîtrisée. Il n'est pas question pour l'Afrique et particulièrement pour la République démocratique du Congo que la transition énergétique puisse être brutale, puisse être injuste et puisse être non équitable. Il est clair que pour nous, la transition énergétique, comme je le disais précédemment, doit être maîtrisée, elle doit être juste, elle doit être équitable et doit se faire de manière progressive pour permettre surtout à nos gouvernements et aux populations, aux communautés riveraines des entreprises extractives de pouvoir se préparer, de pouvoir s'approprier ces processus qui s'imposera à nos États d'une manière ou d'une autre. La deuxième chose que je voudrais souligner, c'est le fait qu'en République démocratique du Congo, depuis 2018, le gouvernement congolais a déclaré que le cobalt fait partie des minéraux stratégiques. Et les raisons qui ont été données sont plusieurs, mais j'ai pris une des raisons qui est pour le gouvernement congolais le fait que le cobalt est très utile dans les cas des énergies renouvelables. Troisième chose que je voudrais souligner, c'est le fait que sur les 7 millions de tonnes de cobalt dans le monde, la République démocratique du Congo détient 51% de réserves mondiales de cobalt à travers le monde. Ce qui fait que par rapport à ces réserves et par rapport à la place stratégique que la République démocratique du Congo détient par rapport au cobalt, notre pays va être certainement sous pression non seulement du gouvernement étranger, mais aussi sous pression des entreprises qui voudraient bien acheter le cobalt de la République démocratique du Congo. La demande, quand la demande croît, il est clair que la pression sur notre gouvernement et sur les communautés va pouvoir s'accroître aussi. Nous savons que le monde voudrait bien avoir le cobalt de la République démocratique du Congo pour le besoin des énergies renouvelables. Mais il est clair pour nous que cet accès au cobalt de la République démocratique du Congo doit se faire de manière légale, transparente et surtout qui respecte les droits humains. Or, il s'est fait malheureusement, et c'est là un des défis importants dont on doit tenir compte, c'est le fait que sur la production globale du cobalt en République démocratique du Congo, 20% vient du secteur artisanal. C'est-à-dire que 20% de la production du cobalt en République démocratique du Congo vient de l'exploitation artisanale. Or, nous savons que dans l'exploitation artisanale, il y a des enfants et des femmes qui sont utilisés. Et là, il se pose pour l'extraction, l'exploitation du cobalt, un problème de droit de ces enfants et un problème de droit de ces femmes. Donc, il est clair pour nous que cette course vers le cobalt entraîne des questions, des défis qu'il faudra prendre en compte. Le défi du respect des droits des enfants, des droits des femmes qui sont utilisés dans cette exploitation artisanale. Et je note ici que, par exemple, dans la province du Katanga, l'ancienne province du Katanga, où le cobalt est produit pour la grande partie, il y a au moins 40 000 enfants. 40 000 enfants qui travaillent dans l'exploitation artisanale. Et ça c'est vraiment énorme. Ça, c'est vraiment énorme. Ça, c'est le premier défi. Le deuxième défi que nous avons, c'est celui qui concerne les conditions sécuritaires. L'exploitation artisanale se fait sans que les creuseurs artisanaux puissent avoir tout l'équipement nécessaire.
De modo que eles tenham o equipamento
Je disais qu'il est clair que les creuseurs artisanaux travaillent dans les conditions sécuritaires totalement difficiles, mais en même temps aussi les conditions environnementales qui sont très, très dangereuses pour leur vie. C'est pour ça que nous pensons que c'est vrai que la transition énergétique, c'est quelque chose d'important qui va s'imposer à nos pays, mais il est clair aussi que cette exploitation devra se faire dans le respect des droits de l'homme. L'avant-dernière chose que je voudrais souligner comme défi, c'est le fait que les autorités de la République démocratique du Congo, les ONG et les communautés ne sont pas préparées à cette transition énergétique. En ce qu'il n'existe pas un plan très clair, notamment de l'utilisation de tous ces revenus qui vont être générés par l'exploitation du cobalt en République démocratique du Congo. C'est vrai que le cobalt va produire de l'argent, mais la question que nous devons nous poser, est-ce que cet argent, le gouvernement congolais a un plan qui puisse permettre à ce que cet argent soit utilisé non pas seulement dans l'intérêt de la classe politique, mais particulièrement dans l'intérêt des communautés qui doivent bénéficier de ces retombées, n'est-ce pas, de l'exploitation du cobalt. Il ne faut pas qu'à la fin de cette exploitation, que les populations ne puissent pas avoir des retombées là-dessus. Donc, il est clair que pour nous, le dernier défi, c'est un défi qui va dans le sens de la sensibilisation même des communautés. Il faut que les communautés soient mises au courant de toutes ces questions que nous discutons au plan international, toutes ces questions que nous discutons au plan africain. Il faut que nous puissions les traduire au niveau des communautés pour que celles-ci puissent être au courant des défis qui se posent et qui se poseront dans l'avenir. Donc, En conclusion, je peux dire tout simplement que nous nous préparons à cette transition énergétique en tant qu'organisation de la société civile, mais nous pensons qu'il n'est pas, bon d'oublier que la course vers l'accès au cobalt risque de devenir, avec les temps qui arrivent, comme la course vers l'exploitation, n'est-ce pas, du coltan, qui à la fin a fini par produire de la guerre contre les populations civiles. Et ça, c'est un risque qui est vraiment très évident, même si nous savons qu'aujourd'hui, la grande partie du pays qui produit le cobalt n'est pas encore arrivée à ce point-là. Mais cette course risque de nous faire arriver là si les communautés ne sont pas préparées. Voilà les quelques mots que je voudrais bien partager avec ceux qui suivent, ceux qui participent à cette session sur la transition énergétique. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Claude. I wanted to ask the speakers that have spoken already just to check the Q&A box, because once Mabel has finished spoken, I want to invite the speakers to respond to some of the Q&A. But I thought it was an excellent presentation by Jean-Claude to link the human rights dimension to the extraction of cobalt, and in particular the fact that we have a sort of green label around the transition. It can often obscure the other bad things that are going on behind the scene. And I think this cobalt thing really illustrates that any green revolution or transition or whatever energy transition we have that's coming into the future, that decarbonization does not mean that while we have clean energy, we do not have we are not in the scenario where there aren't violation of other rights and etc. And I think that's the real crux of this debate. So let me ask the speakers to look at your inbox for the Q&A. And when I ask Maple, if I can invite you, Akwa, to introduce yourself and to give you 15 minutes to speak. If we can take the floor, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Celia, and thank you for having me. My name is Mabel Akwe. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Africa Center for Energy Policy. We are an energy policy think tank, and we advocate for effective and equitable utilization of energy and extractive resources for the economic transformation of Africa. So I will start from the impact of climate change. First of all, the impact of climate change as we have it has been disproportionate across regions. And Africa is one of the regions that is severely impacted. According to the AFDB reports, it shows that 7 out of every 10 countries that are vulnerable to climate change are from Africa. So specifically, some of the impact have been higher temperature, increased drought and floods. And the major one has been the shifting in the agricultural landscape. And the reality is that more than half of sub-Saharan African population are in agriculture activities. So this poses a significant challenge to livelihoods and families who depend on agriculture activities for their work. But so that means that energy transition as it is, all things being equal, should be good news for Africa because it will help us at least to mitigate the challenge we are confronted with in terms of food security and job losses. But then the reality is that fossil fuels also play a significant role in the economies of Africa. Be it the supporting countries to meet their energy demands, energy needs, and most specifically with electricity deficits. We also know that significant amount of revenues from governments come from extraction of fossil activities. So these revenues with a shrinking fossil fuel sector due to the energy transition will impact government significantly, albeit these monies are used to fund national development, food public sector wages, as well as even finance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the transition, as good as it is, also poses this challenge to Africa, because Africa is also looking at this sector to drive industrial growth. So Africa is in a dilemma, more or less, because whereas it's suffering the brunt of climate change, it also enjoys significant benefits from fossil fuel production. And also not to mention that the greatest even aspect is the fact that Africa do not even have the requisite capacity to develop its fossil fuels. And so, the countries that they depend on, or the companies that they depend on, their financiers are also from countries who have made certain stringent targets, that's achieving the zero by 2050, and also divesting funds from fossil fuel production to companies who are rather looking into more greener sources of energy. So this poses that even if we want to develop our fossil fuels, we are challenged by one, funds, and two, the human resource capacity to do so. In addition to that, we have also committed ourselves to the Paris Agreement. Over 50 African countries have committed to the Paris Agreement, which we need to also do. So what Africa needs to do is for governments to ensure that extractive resources, at least within the next 2 to 3 decades, that fossil fuels are still relevant, is to develop it sustainably. And this is where civil society, such as Publish What You Pay, and our institutions play a key role to ensure that companies who are developing this will would publicly disclose their decarbonization strategies, and also governments to set stringent environmental standards such that in the development of our fossil fuels to meet our dying needs, we will also contribute to achieving our nationally determined contributions. So whereas we are optimizing the gains from our fossil fuels, we will at the same time curbing carbon emissions and contributing to our NDCs. But then energy transition, although it should be a good news to us, as I've already mentioned, due to the brunt we are suffering from climate change, it also has its own implications. Area that we cannot lose sight of is the social of energy lives poorer, especially those of us in Africa. Because with the energy transition, first I've mentioned that it will entail a shrinking fossil fuel sector. And this means loss of livelihoods, because the reality is that high-paying jobs in Africa are from this extractive sector. So we have a lot of families and households who are dependent on fossil fuels for their lives. So should there be a shrinking fossil fuel sector due to the energy transition, and there are no proper Africa being plunged into other because of energy transition? Because we are, in addition to those who are directly employed, we also have significant number of people who are also employed along the value chain. Those with both skilled and unskilled labor, informal and formal. It goes down even to the caterer, water suppliers, tailors, and what have you. So we cannot just sit there and say we are moving, we are transitioning. These are some of the things that we need to look at, the impact on the livelihoods. Another area will also be the implications for government revenues. I've already touched on it in the, when I spoke earlier, because the truth is that Africa accrues significant amount of revenues from fossil fuel production through surface rentals, corporate taxes, and all these forms of taxes. So now that we are moving from fossil fuel, the thing is, where is the money coming from? How do we replace the revenue, the tax revenues that will be lost through a collapse of the fossil fuel sector? So if care is not taken, we will join the rest of the world to transition, or will be under pressure to respond to the global call. But at the end of the day, our lives will be worse than it was under climate change. Because the issue here is that even Africa, compared to the rest of the world, is negligible. However, we cannot leverage on that fact and not respond to the call, because this is a collective effort for everybody to contribute their bit. But my case I'm making here is that we shouldn't lose sight of the most important, which is the socioeconomic impact on citizens. But the good news is that energy transition also has some intrinsic economic opportunities that Africa can take advantage of to avert the potential challenges that we can be confronted with. One main opportunity we can take advantage of is the mineral endowment. Although not many, but some countries, particularly those in Southern Africa and Central Africa, have significant amount of reserves of these minerals, being it cobalt, lithium, chromium, bauxite, and the likes. And Jean-Claude mentioned DR Congo's role that they need to play in meeting the world needs or demand for cobalt. So this is an opportunity for us. It appears nature has given us a second chance to build our economy through the new era, which is energy transition. So we need to take advantage of this opportunity to develop our country so that we make up for the significant revenue losses that we tend to suffer under a shrinking fossil fuel sector. And we can do this by governments being deliberate to enact specific industrial policies to drive development of these minerals, such that previously, during the mineral resources era, the gold and what have you, we've always been suppliers of raw materials. And fossil fuel came, we've been suppliers of crude oil and what have you. It's like we develop, we sell, then we go back to borrow, top up and import what we sold, which means we are, instead of getting richer through our resources, we rather became poorer. So this is the opportunity for us to be deliberate, to put in the needed policies to drive a change, to drive economic transformation through this mineral endowment. So those countries who are rich in such precious minerals should be able to develop their systems such that we will not just benefit from export of raw materials, but also benefit from increased value addition and beneficiation. We should spend time to develop the domestic supply chains, so that we're able to manufacture RU technologies or components in Africa. This will increase the take of Africa, local participation and taxes, and increase job creation. We also have to invest in knowledge infrastructure, be it human resource development and institutional development. This is the time that we have to spend to develop geological survey to ascertain our potential. What do we really have to present to the rest of the world, to develop, so that unlike before, where we do not have knowledge of what we have, but advanced countries come in and we have to negotiate directly with them because we don't really have a knowledge of the extent of what we have. This is the time that we have to gather that data. We need to invest to know the kind of skills that is required to join the chain so that we'll be able to develop these technologies here. In addition to, we have to build the institutional capacity to administer effective fiscal laws so that we will be able to administer appropriate laws and generate the desired revenues, so that there will not be avenues for tax avoidance, avenues for illicit financial flows, which is prevalent in our countries. Now, the task for CSOs here is that we can collaborate. Let me finish on this one. We can collaborate with small and medium enterprises and other businesses and build their capacity to adopt renewable energy technologies so that to support their businesses, and they will also run their businesses in a more sustainable manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mabel, and sorry to end the day, because I think you raised some really important questions, and if I may just pick up on one or two points you raised. I think you clearly say that in oil and gas countries, and perhaps in other commodity dependent countries, if we're not careful, if we don't provide the right instruments for change and transformation of these economies, the situation can get worse if these energy transitions happen too fast and they are not managed well. So I think that point is very important. I think it also touches on the point that Johnny made, that there has to be a lot more groundedness in how we think about energy transitions, in particular from an economic dimension. There are vast minerals endowments which are not being utilized to the maximum, in the maximum way currently in Africa. And I think it raises fundamental questions around, particularly for publish what you pay. I always make the mistake in relationship to the type of campaign strategies that are not just focused on firm level governance and accountability as far as extractive goes, but also the broader state apparatus and accountability around that. I want to ask Maple, Johnny, and Mr. Katenda to look at the questions. I have been glancing through them, and maybe to give you both Maple and Jean-Claude some time to look through the Q&A section, and maybe to invite Johnny to maybe respond to some of the questions if you've got time, Johnny. Thanks.
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I was just looking through the questions. Well, so this question of should the rich countries pay? I mean, I think clearly the answer is yes. That then brings with it, but that's obviously the beginning of the discussion, not the end of the discussion, because that then brings with it a massive number of questions around the mixture, through what mechanisms, as I mentioned before, what sort of public and private investment, how do you ensure that such a big wave of investment in infrastructure isn't a new wave of colonialism? I mean, obviously it's in our interests to make those investments, because that will help solve the problem of energy transition, which affects people in this part of the world, just as it affects people in every part of the world. But of course, it's not going to play purely that way in a political debate in Europe or in America and so on. People are going to want to know what's in it for them. It's not going to be politically viable without constructing some kind of case of what's in it for them, and yet what's in it for them can't be some new wave of effective colonialism and so on. So that's it's a big scary problem, but one that can be broken down into constituent pieces and form the basis of a lot of solid work. there's that, but there's questions of things like Miles was asking, you know, should the northern countries decarbonize first? Well, they are decarbonizing first anyway, but I mean, I think maybe the framing is really what unilateral actions would be appropriate beyond what's happening now. And I think it's a very simple one. Paul Collier framed in terms of coal, simply saying it's Germany, Australia, and the USA first, because of the major coal producers and users. Those are the three in the rich world countries. If you want to have any power of persuasion to Mozambique, India, China, and so on, to close down their coal industry sometime, we should just close down our industries straight away. Again, the short-sightedness of politics is such that, you know, I don't know how you make those arguments and get elected in Germany or in the USA or whatever, although let's see what happens in the States this year. So, and then there was one a question from Mike saying, do you have any case studies or examples of such campaigns and how that approach has worked elsewhere? Well, as I say, not around this issue of energy transition, because I don't think we've reached this degree of momentum in this issue until now. But, you know, PWYP does have these examples of supply chain campaigns, which have worked, you know, partner coalitions, one in the north, one in the south, a bunch of times. You know, so there is precedent there. So I guess you know, that's how I would address those questions.
Johnny, I would ask you to keep looking at the Q&A. I'm going to invite the translator to just read out the French questions, and they might be relevant to both you and Maple and certainly Jean-Claude. I think they're directed, and then I want to invite Jean-Claude to answer. So can I ask the translator to come on board? Thank you.
Thanks, Salim. I'm happy to do that. This is something from the Secretariat. I just can't see the questions in French anymore. Maybe they've been ticked as answered. Let me just go to...
It's in the answered section. It's in
right.
the answered section.
Okay, so I can see a...
There's one from Francois Piopin. Yep.
Sure. So I'll say that one, and then I'll trust everyone is in the quiet language room so they can hear the interpretation for this. So the question is from François Piopin. Comme l'a souligné Madame Diop dans le panel précédent sur le renforcement des capacités de la société civile à propos de la transparence des contrats, ce serait indispensable de prendre en compte aussi la transition énergétique. I think this is more a comment than a question, but maybe someone has something to...
So do you want to read out another question, sure. Billy Arthur Gandhi? Yeah, if you don't mind.
There is one from Billy Arthur and Gandhi.
That's right, Billy Arthur, yeah.
Quel pourra être l'apport des communautés locales, des peuples autochtones et de la société africaine pour une transition énergétique juste, équitable et maîtrisée?
And then I'm going to ask you one by Bryce Makoso, if you go further down. Bryce Makoso.
Sure.
And then Eric Itoga. So we'll take those four and then leave it for now there. All right. Thanks.
La question vient de M. Brice Makoso. Jean-Claude, est-ce que le gouvernement de la RDC travaille sur une fiscalité juste en vue de tirer profit de l'exploitation massive de ce cobalt? Tu as parlé de la pression des entreprises pour l'accès aux minéraux. Est-ce que la société civile travaille sur les risques de corruption liés à cette course aux matières premières, ainsi que les risques de développer le système des préfinancements courants dans le secteur pétrolier actuellement? Donc ça, c'est clairement une question qui était adressée à Jean-Claude Katembe, qui pourra y répondre peut-être plus tard. Is there another question, Salim, that you wanted me to read out? Or...
Okay, Eric Itoga, question from him. Wondering if you can translate that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fine.
I think I want to be fair. Maybe if I can take Therese as well after that. I see it's right down, and let's leave it at that. I think.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going.
So Eric Itoga. You got Eric Itoga?
Yes.
Okay.
Je pense qu'il est nécessaire d'actualiser les textes actuels car contrairement à la RDC, tous les pays n'ont pas intégré cette problématique. C'est le cas du Cameroun. D'autre part, la pression autour de ces minéraux stratégiques mérite d'accroître la transparence tant dans le processus d'attribution des titres irrelatifs, mais aussi en matière de gestion environnementale. Enfin, je pense que l'Afrique pourrait saisir cette opportunité pour renforcer son contenu local.
Okay, and then can we do Therese Makombe?
Sure. She's right at the end, sorry. Yes. Par rapport à l'inquiétude de la transition énergétique dont M. Claude a fait allusion au début de son intervention, qu'est-ce qui est en train d'être fait pour que cette transition soit plus juste? Et j'ajouterais aussi avec un plan précis et temporel. I think that's all the questions in French now.
Okay, fantastic. Jean-Claude, can I invite you? And then I'll open to Maple and then Johnny again. Jean-Claude? Put your camera on, please, if you don't mind.
Merci. Oui, j'ai reçu plusieurs questions. Je vais commencer par celle qui demande si la République démocratique du Congo a mis en place une stratégie pour tirer profit de l'exploitation du cobalt. J'ai dit exactement, nous avons cet avantage en République démocratique du Congo d'avoir une nouvelle loi minière. Et cette nouvelle loi minière met en place plusieurs mécanismes qui permettent à ce que les revenus issus de l'industrie extractive minière soient redistribués de manière plus ou moins équitable entre les niveaux nationaux, les niveaux provinciaux et le niveau local. Et je peux vous dire qu'il y a énormément de revenus qui arrivent au point de communautés locales aujourd'hui en République démocratique du Congo, notamment avec la question de la redevance minière. Mais ce qui est clair, c'est qu'une stratégie qui puisse permettre à ce que cet argent soit investi de manière à ce que les communautés puissent en tirer profit, c'est ce à quoi nous sommes en train de travailler aujourd'hui. Donc, nous avons une loi qui permet à ce que les communautés, les provinces puissent avoir des revenus issus, n'est-ce pas, de la fiscalité au niveau du code minier pour que les provinces puissent en tirer profit. Maintenant, il y a une autre question qui m'a été posée. Qu'est-ce que la société civile fait aujourd'hui pour, en fait, participer ou apporter son apport à la transition énergétique? Ce que nous sommes en train de faire aujourd'hui en tant que société civile, c'est d'abord de travailler au niveau même de la société civile, particulièrement de la coalition Publier ce que vous payez, pour que les organisations membres de Publier ce que vous payez puissent s'approprier la question de la transition énergétique, qui n'est pas encore une question inscrite au débat entre les organisations de la société civile. Quand nous serons préparés, nous pouvons engager maintenant les débats avec les autres parties prenantes, notamment le gouvernement et les entreprises. À ce jour, la semaine prochaine, nous allons avoir une grande session d'atelier lors de laquelle on va pouvoir discuter aussi de la question de transition énergétique pour permettre à ce que la société civile s'approprie de la question, que la société civile soit sensibilisée sur la question. Et après seulement, nous allons, quand nous serons prêts, commencer les échanges avec les autres parties prenantes, la société civile et les entreprises. Parce que nous estimons pour nous que c'est quand même une question très importante. On ne peut pas se lancer dans ce genre de débat sans être suffisamment formé, sans être suffisamment préparé. Et la coalition au niveau international, bien ce que vous payez au niveau international, a commencé ces discussions et nous voulons vraiment en tirer le plus grand profit. La question qui m'a été encore posée, c'est celle de savoir quels sont les mécanismes que la société civile met en place pour que ces cobaltes puissent profiter, en fait, puissent servir de tremplin au développement. Je pense que je disais dans mon intervention que la République démocratique du Congo a déclaré le cobalt comme étant un minerai stratégique. Et en tant que tel, le cobalt fait entrer beaucoup de ressources dans les caisses de l'État au trésor public. Il est pour nous question maintenant de faire un suivi de tous ces revenus qui sont payés pour permettre à ce que ces revenus ne soient pas détournés par les autorités politiques, mais qu'elles puissent servir exactement au développement des communautés. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Maple if you maybe want to respond to some of the questions. Can I give the floor to you? And then I'm going to ask Johnny after that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Celia. I saw a question about hidden contracts in South Africa for RE contracts and the role that civil society actors are expected to play. First of all, maybe this civil society organizations and for this matter, Publish What We Pay can take it up, that the issue of contract transparency and disclosure can be extended to renewable energies, such that, because the problem is that most often when we start this way, we just start off without putting the right mechanisms in place. So it's when we get to the midway, then and we start suffering the impact of the actions that we took years back. That's where we realize that we need to go back to correct the wrongs. But now that we are still at the initial stage, I think we don't have to proceed without the needed disclosure policies, so that right from the onset, contracts will not be by direct negotiation and hidden, kept somewhere. People are not able to access it, to monitor it, as we have with oil and gas and mineral resources. But we are starting on a new note, and this is the opportunity we have to campaign or advocate for policy reforms to ensure contract disclosure to be extended to renewable energies, such that we will not have direct negotiations. Competitive bidding will start right now. Let us update our Renewable Energy Act to take care of some of these things, so that it will be easier for monitoring by civil societies, monitoring by stakeholders and all interested parties to make the most out of our renewable energy resources. And there was also a question about whether the global north should take the lead in decarbonization. And I think they've already done so, because in my earlier exposition, I mentioned that Africa's emissions are negligible. It means that the problem we are facing right now is based on the level of carbon emissions or greenhouse emissions from advanced countries. And so they are leading the way, because if we lead the way, it will not amount to much. So if really we are targeting having global temperatures reducing to levels below 2 degrees Celsius to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then the significant amount of effort should come from their end, because the US and China, they are leading the way. I think US used to take, now China has taken the lead due to their energy demand, because most of these emissions come from energy production and its uses. So it's in right order to say they've started. Most of them have targeted 2050 to be carbon neutral, and most companies from advanced countries have also targeted same, and they are even divesting funds from fossil fuels. So they are doing it. They are doing, maybe the pace is slow, because when you check the Sustainable Development Goals, you realize that we are lagging behind in terms of the steps we need to take to do this. So a lot of effort is expected from those from advanced countries. But of course, the bit that we can do from Africa, we also need to do to contribute our quota, because we suffer the most from climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. I'm going to ask Johnny if you want to make any remarks, and then I want to invite actually the Publish What You Pay, staff also to maybe comment just now. Johnny, go for it.
So Joe posted a question about so-called leave it in the ground proposals. Especially in early producer countries. I think this is broadly relevant to a bunch of countries in Africa. I mean, Uganda, Kenya, Mauritania, Senegal, Tanzania. I'm sure there are others. We did a couple of case studies, actually, because one other question here is because energy transition is happening, and all of those policies have the object of decreasing demand for fossil fuels, then how much money are governments going to get anyway? I mean, even if they go ahead and develop. I think everybody on this call knows that the answer to that question is nearly always less money than you think and much later than you think. That has been the case since way before energy transition, but energy transition exacerbates that answer. It'll be much less than you think and much later than you think. So then the question comes, well, why not just pay Uganda an equivalent amount of money in today's money for all of the Ugandan state's future potential earnings, and then for leaving the oil in the ground. Just don't build the pipeline, don't develop the fields, and we will pay you a calculated amount, which is the same as what you would have got if you'd gone ahead and developed it. And the answer, by the way, in the case of Uganda, is about $3 billion. If you take a model, if you model the Ugandan contracts forward and you make the normal kinds of assumptions about when those projects will begin and the costs of building a pipeline, but you've got the normal delay in pay of revenues to governments and so on and so on and so on. And then you, not to go too much into the weeds, but you shrink it back down into a net present value and amount of money today. It's worth about $3 billion. So why not just offer the Ugandan government $3 billion to not develop that oil field? That would be a completely sensible thing. And by the way, the cost of keeping that carbon in the ground under that proposal would be about $2 per ton of carbon dioxide at a time when a ton of carbon dioxide is trading at $55 a ton in the EU, $20 in California, $30 in Canada. So it's tremendously good value for whoever's going to put up $3 billion to buy 1.5 billion tons of CO2 that's kept in the ground. Amazing value. So that's a kind of proposal. Obviously, these are very new ideas, and often it takes a lot of time for people to feel comfortable with it. And even people who spent a long time involved in transparency, it's transparency of an activity. So what do I do if now I'm going to make a case that there shouldn't be any activity? Be kind of confusing in terms of your own identity, but it's conceivably a kind of program that PWYP could take a look at. It could offer individual countries an option to run that analysis, then decide what they think about, whether they want to have some kind of campaign there, then what kind of campaign, and so on. I mean, there are you know, innovative program ideas which would be possible. If I was the Ugandan government, I would certainly take $3 billion instead of all of the risk, because there's tremendous risk involved now in developing any new project, because they take decades to come through. So.
Thank you, Johnny. Sorry to cut you there. I want to invite maybe Jean-Claude or Maple to make one or two remarks. There is a question from Ibrahima in French. I don't know, Jean-Claude, you want to respond to it? Maybe.
I'm happy to read the question from Ibrahima. Merci pour cette tribune au service de la transparence dans la gestion des ressources pétrolières et gazières. La question est, quels moyens de contrôle pour les populations? Quel plaidoyer pour un investissement d'une part des ressources tirées des énergies fossiles pour soutenir les énergies renouvelables et les conditions de la femme et de la fille en Afrique?
Sorry, finish. I thought you were finished.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It's finished now. Thank you.
Ibrahima, can I open the floor for you, maybe to answer one or two questions? Sorry, Jean-Claude, I called him Ibrahima. My apologies.
Oui, merci encore une fois pour la parole. Je pense que j'ai essayé de répondre à Ibrahima en disant tout. Il est très important que la société civile se prépare, se forme sur la question. En ce moment-là, elle peut aussi former les populations sur la question afin d'organiser ce que nous appelons le contrôle citoyen. Le contrôle citoyen. Et par rapport à ce contrôle citoyen, je pense que ce sont des choses que nous faisons couramment, mais il est clair
Sound, yeah, it's frozen, eh? Okay, should we give it another 10 seconds? If not, I'm gonna... Oh, there we go. Jean-Claude, fini?
Oui, merci. Je disais que vers les autorités, les populations doivent orienter leur contrôle citoyen pour que les autorités investissent ces revenus dans les secteurs privés.
He's frozen again, eh? Am I correct?
Yes, unfortunately, we can't hear Jean-Claude right now.
Okay, Maple, can I ask you to say any last remarks?
Thank you very much, Celia. I would want to end by encouraging African governments, civil societies, that we have another opportunity to ensure economic transformation of our economies through natural resources. We shouldn't stay back and be focused on the benefits we are getting from fossil fuels. Yes, we can develop a sustainable sustainably, but we are moving, because in the next few decades, those fuels will no longer be relevant. So whereas we are seeking to make the most out of it now, we should be looking into the future. That is investing our resources in the economic opportunities within the energy transitioning, starting from developing the policies along the value chain, so that developing domestic supply, so that we can increase local content, so that we will not have companies here importing expatriates to do the technical aspect of manufacturing, or to do the extraction of resources and get majority of the gain from it. But we will do it ourselves. We should collaborate with the private sector to develop human resource, to develop our human resources with the appropriate skills that are needed in this energy transition, so that we will not be left behind. This is the time for us to, if it's about setting up funds to sponsor people, or developing our academic and research institutions to train our human resource with the requisite skills that is needed to participate in the economics of energy transition, be it manufacturing of RE components, and also extraction of the mineral resources that is currently needed to produce such resources, such that we will not be consumers as we have always been, but we will also be producers and exporters of the finished product, and make the most of energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mabel. Johnny, any last words for an advice to Publish What You Pay in how to take this forward and how to build campaigns around some of the insights that have come?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on Mabel's points, because I couldn't agree more. I think there's a couple of really key aspects about renewables, is that first of all, they're much more job intensive than fossil fuels are. Fossil fuels are just incredibly capital intensive industries, and scaled solar and wind will provide, you know, not 20% more jobs, but 20 times more jobs. It's incredibly labor intensive compared to fossil fuels. And of course, Africa has huge solar resources. The fact that no one's monetizing it yet shouldn't block us, who are in the natural resource sector, from thinking of it as a precious resource, which can actually be monetized. And then the second thing is, if you really do start to, in a sense, trying to think about the transition is thinking about the future in a detailed and grounded way. Another thing that struck me is that what a renewables path is for any country is as unique as a fingerprint. And I take Kenya and Uganda as a couple of examples, because very similar climatic conditions, you know, same broad English Swahili language groups, lots of similarities, and yet Kenya already has significant geothermal and, you know, a fair bit of wind coming on in Turkana. Uganda has geothermal potential which is not yet developed. The paths of those two countries, even though they're very similar to each other in many ways, in renewables is quite specific. So someone needs to go out and do that work of what is Namibia's specific path to renewables, what is Senegal's, and so on. And the last thing is, you know, that could reveal quite astonishing opportunities. I do want to actually kind of frame it in those terms. I mean, for instance, the Sahara, perhaps not kind of massive solar farm providing electricity to Europe for a bunch of technical reasons, but very possible to generate solar farms of a scale which could then enable kind of satellite, massively energy intensive industries, where the almost free source of energy gives you a major competitive advantage there. We're now seeing solar panels being floated out on lakes, which solves a whole bunch of issues. So, and these things will just keep coming. It's a very fast flowing technology space, and that also offers lots of opportunities. So I think the more we get our heads out of looking backwards and trying to protect what isn't a very big benefit anyway, and forward towards what's going to happen anyway and offers huge potential, you know, that's perhaps a way to go.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Eric Basil, who wants to say the last word, I just want to, in 1 minute, summarize what I thought was a very rich and diverse insights, and a very limited time to actually dig into them. But I want to sort of maybe you know, present to the members of the you know, I always get this right, publish what you pay, to think about inquiry into what beyond extractive means in the light of very rapid decarbonization, restructuring happening around the world. It's effectively the globalization of decarbonization, if I may put it that way, in which Africa could be left behind. And if we do not understand the broader depths and implications of this, beyond extractives is the timing for it and the opportunity to actually restructure away from these kinds of dependency. I think the opportunity is there, and we have to figure out how we do it. I, as a person who runs a climate foundation, I can tell you that that narrative is not going to be able to be developed. Somebody's mic on. That narrative is not only a monopoly of climate people. It has to be widened up. And I don't think that those insights sit with a particular group. And I might dare say that Northern climate environmentalists and activists do not have sometimes a very good idea of what goes on the African continent. So this thing is something that has to be shaped from bottom up. We've heard some really amazing people that can help you to do that. And I think that is a great opportunity for Publish What You Pay to develop this narrative. And we have to collaborate with climate activists across the globe, but we should not limit that collaboration to them. So Eric, if I can hand over to you, I want to thank you all for inviting me. I found it really enlightening and enjoyed it. And I enjoyed listening to very experienced speakers on your panel. Thank you very much. Eric, if I may
invite you. Salim. I will do I will say some few words in French, so I will invite you to switch into the French room. Alors, je voudrais sincèrement remercier Salim, Johnny, Mabel et Jean-Claude et tous les participants qui ont pris part à ce panel sur la transition énergétique. C'était la dernière session de notre conférence Afrique. Et malgré la fatigue et la longueur de la conférence, nous avons quand même eu de nombreux participants qui nous ont rejoints. Les nombreuses questions qui ont été posées à la suite des brillantes présentations par les différents intervenants démontrent de l'intérêt que les Africains et que le monde portent à la question de la transition énergétique. Il ressort clairement que la véritable question pour publier ce que vous payez au niveau du continent, c'est celle de savoir quelle est la position que l'Afrique souhaite occuper vis-à-vis de la transition énergétique. Est-ce que la transition énergétique est perçue comme étant une opportunité telle que Mabel l'a si bien relevé, une opportunité économique, ou alors on peut la regarder sous le prisme des défis sécuritaires, humains et environnementaux, tels que Jean-Claude l'a également soulevé dans sa communication. Il y a là la question de quel est l'équilibre que l'on doit faire entre la transition énergétique, quel est l'équilibre que l'on doit trouver. Et ça, Johnny l'a si bien également présenté dans sa communication. Donc, c'est une question très complexe, mais je pense que la première question que nous devons nous atteler à répondre, c'est quelle est la position, sous quel prisme l'Afrique doit-elle regarder la transition énergétique. Et je ne pense pas que ce soit on ait une réponse unique, que ce soit un prisme unique, commun à tous les États. Mais je pense que c'est un prisme qui est spécifique en fonction des réalités et des opportunités et des défis auxquels chacun des États font face. Voilà ce que je voulais souhaiter, je voulais partager avec vous avant de clore de te repasser la parole, Salim, pour clore cette session. Je vous remercie.
No, I think we have reached the time, and Eric, thank you for summarizing it so well. I want to encourage you to take this forward and maybe have a conversation with you yourself afterwards. But just to thank all the speakers and also the participants and the panelists. Thank you very much, and the organizers. Merci beaucoup. Bon voyage.
Merci, Salim. Sandrine, quelques mots? Tu peux dire quelques mots?
Non, je pense que tout le monde a très bien terminé ce webinaire. Merci à tout le monde d'avoir suivi toute cette session. Ça a été 2 journées très intenses, mais avec des conversations très riches. Donc oui, merci à tout le monde et je vais terminer ce webinaire. Au revoir.
Merci. Au revoir.